I'd like you to think of a joke. Specifically, what makes it funny? Is it the wordplay? Is it the structure? If you told it to somebody from another country, would they laugh? Even if you could translate it directly? Humor is this universal experience, but how we experience humor is not universal. So when we're making our game to be played on the global stage, how do we make sure the ha-has happen? Our next speaker has been spending a lot of time diving into humor and building it into his game, building relationships. Now, this next talk will have some lewd/sexual humor, so be advised if that's a concern for you or people you're watching with. But I am excited for this speaker to come to the stage. Please welcome Tanat Boozayaangool.
Hello, welcome to this talk called Structuring Humor for a Global Audience of someone from Thailand. That someone is me. Hello, my name is Tanat. Uh, I'm an indie developer from Bangkok, Thailand. I did my bachelor's in game dev in the US. I couldn't get a game dev job, and here I am making making indie game building relationships. So what is building relationships? Here is a quick video trailer to kind of get you introduced. So yeah, next let's talk a little bit more about my comedy experience. So you could say I'm a bit of a writer. I tend to consume a lot of writing. And if you don't know what this app is, good for you. But enough about my hobby. Let's talk about some work experience. So I used to work on Stadia. If you don't know what Stadia is, sorry, if you don't know what Stadia was, you really don't need to worry about it. Now, I've decided to switch to games, which is truly the clown career path. Now, on that note, let's talk about a quick disclaimer before we move on. This talk will not teach you how to be funny. It's something that is quite frankly impossible. Comedy is a craft that you build over time. You hone your instincts or expand your references. There is just not enough time to kind of talk about it in this talk. So instead, this talk will equip you with the tools to dissect humor and understand what supports comedy and what helps land a joke. All right, so to get started on that, let's go through some comedy fundamentals. Number one, setup and payoff. So the setup is kind of like the story, the lead in. It establishes context. It's usually concise or engaging or both. And it usually has some kind of intuitive narrative flow that makes the situation kind of clear. The thing then the payoff comes in, which is kind of like our punchline. Think of it as a joke. It plays with the context we establish, and it does so in different ways. It could twist something, it could be something absurd, something unexpected, and everything in comedy can be viewed as setup and payoff. It is kind of like the lens we use to understand pretty much everything. And it, to me, starting out learning about this kind of helps unlock like, oh, that's why a lot of these jokes kind of work. And it's all about setup and payoff. So let's take a quick example from the game. So in this screenshot I'm going to show you, we're talking to Millie, who is one of the buildings you can date in the game. And we're talking a little bit about fishing. So Millie over here says, "Oh, why I've always wanted to try fishing, um, though I'm vegetarian actually. Switched to only eating furniture last year." So it's with this example, there's separate text boxes to kind of put like one of the setup is in one text box, the payoff is in a different text box, using camera cuts to kind of help bring the player into where the joke is, the motion in which the camera like kind of moves and then switches up at the punchline, things like that. Or it's kind of just to tell players who are like kind of skimming that like, wait a minute, that piece of info was important. Um, Overall, there's like a flow to the dialogue, right? It starts talking about fishing, which is a mini game in the game. Um, the being vegetarian, and it's like, wait, what do you mean being a vegetarian as a building? And how about furniture? It's like, I guess it makes sense, you move a furniture into a building, like, um, so let's move on to the next topic, which is timing and delivery. It's another kind of the foundation within comedy. And something that's very intuitive, right? It's playing around with subtle yet recognizable norms, expressions, emotions that really help frame the situation and help provide like context to what's going on and playing around with that basically. So let's take a look at another example. Here, Millie is asking the player how they're finding the island. It's the same introduction beat as the previous example. So we're gonna play this video. This is a dialogue option, and we're gonna start with picking the second option over here, which is I've also been getting stuck here and there. So yeah, a lot, in this game is there's no voice acting, delivery and timing is kind of within the text box. So things that I play around with are instead the camera, and the emotion that it evokes without rigging, because most of the work on this game is from me and I don't know how to animate that well. So all the buildings have really no facial expression, but it's finding out ways to kind of play with that like deadpan look, but still create this like sense of unease as the camera pans and like downwards, toward from Millie, and the dialogue changes and the different way in which the camera moves from dialogue to dialogue. And yeah, the other thing I play a lot with is short, concise dialogue to just kind of help align the focus. Moving on, set up, punchline. Things can feel repetitive over time. Um, so sometimes you apply a different technique. Number three here, misdirection, which is when we disrupt our own patterns. A misdirect is like a twist on what we've established, with subtle hints sprinkled into the setup. A good misdirect is something that is unexpected, but not necessarily random. At the end of the day, it should make some sort of sense. So let's take a look at an example. Um, you know how every game has a fishing mini game? Well, the same is true about building relationships, but instead of fishing up fish, you fish up cars. Um, and it plays to the genre expectations of, there back in the Twitter days, there was this account was like a big hit tweet that said something about, a game is good if it has like a fishing mini game, which is, a little bit of nonsense, but it's kind of funny. And it plays that like, yeah, there is a lot of fishing mini games in across all the different types of games out there. Um, but with the twist that you fish up cars. Um, and it kind of makes sense, I guess, because cars go into the garage. There is some relation to human fishing, car, human. It makes sense. Moving on. Now that we've learned about all these different topics, let's put it all together with our fourth topic, which is the rule of thirds. They say that comedy comes in three because it takes three of something to establish a pattern. Sometimes it's a series of punchlines where one joke sets up for the next. Sometimes it's a series of jokes that suggest a certain direction, just for the last one to kind of take it somewhere entirely different. It's not about that you need three jokes, but that there is directionality for the jokes. This way, even if the first joke is not funny, you can call back to it later and it will it can be humorous. It is kind of a way to kind of like, if the first joke isn't funny, maybe the next one is funny, and that you can kind of salvage it that way. That's how I view it, at least. So if you did not find the first joke funny, don't worry about it because the game does something similar. Um, it introduces a furniture building minigame, which is kind of like the cooking minigame in this universe, where you're at a picnic date and you're making a sandwich, which is kind of a common thing, like a dating sim, kind of like a first date type like fantasy of it all. Um, but here you're building IKEA style furniture. Um, and it's like a table, and it just makes sense. The fishing mini game that we talked about earlier. Later on in the game, you encounter this race car that just moves really, really fast, so fast that it breaks out of the UI itself. And after that, at some point in the game, you encounter this like lot open area that you can build up into car park, where you can have the different fish, different cars kind of swimming and driving about. Um, it just kind of makes sense. All right. Um, Point of all that is that to make sure that your bits develop as the game goes on. Again, the rule of thirds is not that there should be three of something, but that the jokes should evolve multiple times without boring the audience or becoming confusing. All right. So next part, let's look beyond joke writing. Um, so let's talk a little bit about world building and how I approach world building in this game. This title really started from the pun, building relationships and the concept of a dating sim for buildings. But I think the game feels special to me because of how it commits to that joke and goes beyond the pun. Um, so yeah, it uses a technique in like improv comedy. I don't know what it's called, but essentially it's if X is true, what else is true about it? So in this picture, we've talked a lot about that in the different examples leading up to now to here. There's another example where you know this house is holding up a phone booth, and in this universe, that's like a person holding up a phone to their ear. And it's just kind of like to me, it just kind of makes sense, like what is the equivalent of X and Y, if buildings are the humans, and you kind of just build from there and create something consistent. um, Next is about this beat sheet. It's I put it very zoomed out so you don't look at actually what's on there. So please don't look, because it's very outdated. But the point is that having a beat sheet can be helpful to kind of start out, to kind of plan, to brainstorm like, oh, I have all these different ideas. I have all these different plot lines. I have all these different topics. How do I figure out what makes sense in the game? What doesn't make sense in the game? And just it also is useful for planning setups and payoffs. Any type of rule of thirds of just like, okay, here's this, and this context helps develop this bit and helps make sure this next joke lands. So yeah, some kind of beat sheet of a kind or whatever equivalent just kind of works. Just work with whatever tool makes sense to you. Um, and here's another topic about game design. This is a post by Marina Diaz, who talks about, who's an emotional game designer, and talking about like how even in emotional working with complex emotion in games, um, it is helpful to kind of keep the game design simple, and that means to kind of focus less on the complexity and making sure the onboarding like makes sense, making sure it's intuitive, because it's when something is hard to understand, then it's hard to understand the context, the joke, the emotions. And the same thing with like, if you look at horror games as well, there's a lot of like kind of simple elements in a lot of horror game design, where on paper it looks very simple, but in combination with everything that's going on, it makes everything feel scary and impactful, even if on paper it's like pressing a button. Um, so don't be afraid to keep things so simple, because you need to have that space to for players to understand the rest of the what is going on in the game. Um, cool. Next part is a quick blast through a bunch of different games, because there's a lot of different games do comedy very differently, and you will see a lot of different details, a lot of different like techniques. And I just want to highlight a bunch of examples. If you've not played through all these games, that's okay. And there's also other games outside of here that I did not include in slides. They're still funny. Eh, That's just I just happened to pick these couple of games because they were top of mind. Um, so yeah, let's talk about level design. Level design can support comedy. In this game, thank goodness you're here. There's a bunch of areas you kind of have to travel around, and you see repeated areas, but with different NPCs. And it is kind of just a natural way to support comedy. So lots of different types of side jokes, like small little jokes. You'll see character like if you pass through the same area multiple times, you have to do any kind of backtracking. That is room for like okay, let's add something fun here that doesn't necessarily have like take a lot of work if you have the systems kind of already in mind for that. Um, but you know, planning for this ahead of time can really help like make sure things kind of land. Um, another point from Thank Goodness You're Here, music design. At the ending in this game, there's like a musical sequence where um, there's basically kind of a call and response structure. There's lyrics being sung, and it there's a rhythm to it, and it helps in terms of context, in terms of anticipation. What I mean is that when there's a musical structure, call and response, it's like a melody plays and a response plays, a melody play, a different response plays, and that is just kind of a prime pattern that you can play around with when you do something funny. And when how the game does it is that it has a rhyming sequence, and you're just kind of okay, what is going to rhyme with this word when it's the next line, and it shows like one phrase at a time. And there's like a little smaller gameplay beat, and you just don't know what to expect. um, so it's something like music kind of has patterns in place already that you can really play with expectation. Um, Next part is talking about animation. I'm not an animator, and I'm also not a philosophy person. I cannot tell you why physical comedy is funny. It's car move funny. It's funny. Weird movement funny. I don't have a PhD in this, and I cannot explain further. But one thing I can talk about what the golf is how each level you kind of like expand different parts of like the level structure of it all, different ways in which a car moves in a way that a car doesn't move. So having that kind of structure helps prime the audience like, oh, what do should I expect next, and then there's room to like subvert those expectations, right? Okay. Next bit, this game was part of Game Devs of Color many years ago, many years, probably 5 years, 4 or 5 years ago. But the point I'm trying to talk about in Stars of Time, it's a very dramatic game in terms of there's lots of dramatic stakes going on. Um, but the game kind of intercuts the moments of drama with comedy, and it builds this like formula for oh, you go to battles, you find different rooms, and in these rooms, you kind of have a break and have a little chit chat to develop the characters, to kind of put jokes in, and then back to like the dramatic stakes. And having that kind of format helps like players know what to expect. And then it also creates room for you to kind of separate those expectations later on. So it's a game that I think is very good for studying like narrative design, of understanding, okay, where if I had to do those like plot graph of like where the climax is, like it and then tie that into when I'm twisting the formula and whatnot. This is a good game to kind of look at. Um, Last game I want like another game I want to talk about, and last game in this list is from Wonderstop, which is on taking notes from improv comedy. In Wonderstop, you meet lots of different characters that don't stay around for very long. So you have to kind of make sure that you like, introduce a character, understand a character very quickly. And it really feels like it's an improv scene. And there is some improv energy there. It's hard to explain, but it's something that if you play it and look at it from a lens of like if I'm an improv character on screen and I have to make the most impact in a way that is memorable but not like always over the top, like this game is a good it's a good exercise to look at this game that way. Um, okay, so you'll notice that all the examples today have not featured puns, and that's because puns are not funny. They're playful but not inherently humorous. Puns are exhausting. Almost always they are painfully obvious, and I'm ready to take on hate for this. I'm ready to stand on this platform. But sometimes puns can be funny, but you have to work for it. And here's one example. Um, Knuckle Sandwich is an absurd RPG. Think like Earthbound meets WarioWare. And the intro beat, I cannot explain what happens, but it goes to all different like areas, like the to set up this like exposition, the world and everything and mechanics. The game introduces so many different things, and it feels absurd, but within the same like it all makes sense. It's just really good. And the point is that it goes through all the different like mini games and shows you all different things. At the end of the sequence, that's when the game goes into the title and shows you like, oh, knuckle sandwich, and uses that as a pun. So point is that like puns don't just automatically make things funny. It is a play on words. It's a word player, right? So if you bring it up when it's not expected, then it's like, oh, you got me. It's still not funny, but at least it has a reaction and not just like, ugh, you know. All right. One last thing, which is I gotta plug my game. Um, a lot of things that I do is kind of pairing real life scenarios with ridiculous happenstance. So we're gonna play through the sequence real quick. All right. So in this sequence, we're moving a table. The music starts silent. It builds tension. And this is kind of like a date in the game. And there's a lot going on, and you just don't know where it's going to go. And we're gonna move on to a later part in this date. Yeah. So I think out of all that, I think this part is the one that really nails the tone. And switches up like there's moments it's like, oh, is this kind of playful? What is going on? I guess I'll go along with the scene. And the character has a different understanding of the context, and it kind of switches everything apart and then changes up the entire mood. All right. So yeah, we're gonna move on to a later portion in this section. So yeah, a lot of what happens in that scene is lots of like tension, and then I guess misdirect like what is Millie going to say in response to that. I tried scatting because it makes sense with the jazz. The scatting wasn't very clear, but shout out to Gina, who is the composer for this game. Um, so yeah, closing thoughts. Number one, during development, I think it can be hard to tell if something is still funny. So I find it comforting to focus on how the bits develop and how understandable it is, not necessarily about how funny something is, because I think like it's very subjective at times. A lot of things that I kind of showed in this slide, like showed in this game, not everything is funny, and that's okay. It's really like as I develop, like I tend to not ask myself like, is this funny enough? But more so like, does it make sense? Do the bits develop? Um, yeah. Uh, Number two is the context. I think that context is kind of the most important part when it comes to humor comedy, making sure that there is enough context, making sure that there's not too much context, and just making sure that like when the joke happens, it kind of makes sense. Um, a lot of times, sometimes in the game, I will have kind of like a notes app of like list of like funny things, like jokes, and try to work that from if for example have things in my notes app like dikes, less like dikes, which are lesbian dikes, river dikes. There's something there, but I don't know where how to kind of like and then I work from there. Like, how do I introduce that? How do I build the setup for that? If that's the punchline, how does that happen? Another thing, post hot clarity rhymes with post not clarity. It's just like how figuring out what makes sense in terms of what the context that helps land that joke. Um, so yeah, I know I talked about this game a lot as well as an example. But I really didn't understand a lot of what's going on in this game because it's very regional humor, right? It's something that's very British. But I kind of just enjoyed it because the voices are funny. There's a lot of things that kind of support the entertainment, not necessarily just it doesn't rely on just the humor. So when harking back to the talk, the title of the talk, um, it's like setting out as a goal to like make something funny. It's going to be hard, um, and partly because like I don't like one thing about comedy is that you're you're gonna be funnier to your friends compared to like um strangers. Like you might have like a friend who's like super funny and they try stand up and they just kind of bomb on stage. Like those two are entirely different things, right? Because like when you're friends with someone, their jokes are just kind of funnier, when their personality is kind of like there and prominent. It's easier to understand, like to kind of like almost empathize with a joke, even if a joke is bad. Like you'll laugh and pity kind of for a friend versus like someone you truly do not know. I don't really know how to fully like translate for game dev, but it's something that I think that like there people gravitate more towards art that feels authentic, towards art that like as if you want to be humorous, like it helps to have some kind of consistent, authentic personality that is shining from the game. Like I, it's just kind of it's unexplainable, but it's something that I see in like other forms of media, and there has to be something in relation to that, but within games. But yeah, last thing I want to talk about is about comedic inspiration. Um, and a lot of the inspiration from this game kind of comes from, or the world building kind of comes from uh, TTRPG, the world TTRPG, Dimension 20. I watched a lot of Dimension 20, and it's tabletop role playing with improv comedians, improv artists. So it has a whimsical approach to world building. It has a blend of serious and comedy. Um, Lots of twist in this show is consistent with like the world building, but also funny. It's a joke. And yeah, A Crown of Candy is one that I guess is the most like one-to-one inspiration to build relationships. Not exactly one. A Crown of Candy is like the season that I guess is I've learned a lot about world building from watching A Crown of Candy, and it's like taking Candyland, which is a children's board game, and combining it with Game of Thrones, and the result of it is super high drama and super high comedy. But to talk about the title of the talk, like approaching humor for a global audience, really, I don't know. I think it's something that is hard to give a good answer to. I think for me, I have lots of like Western influences, Western references, and I tap onto things that are universal, like being a freak. Thank you for coming. That's it. My talk is over. Here's QR links to my social. please wish list the game if the game's not out yet, and please buy the game if the game is out already. It's called Building Relationships. Thank you for listening.
Thanks so much for that talk, Tanat. Though I will admit, I think it's going to be a little different next time I bring furniture into the house. Oh boy. I appreciate that this talk gave us a little bit of arithmetic to the absurdity, helped break down what it is to convey humor in games using each of the different tools that we have available. And most excitedly, you don't have to distill your sense of humor or personality down to what you think is the lowest common denominator. Instead, what creates good humor is dialing into what you feel is funny and then figuring out the way to convey that to others. And those people that are the right ones for the joke will find it along the way. If you would like to keep up with Tanat, you can follow him on Blue Sky at TanatB, or you can find him on Instagram with some occasional spicy content at Tanat Potato.